He turned off the kitchen light while I was still standing at the counter. Not the overhead one. The small lamp I'd had for 31 years, the one my late husband bought at a garage sale in Sudbury the summer our youngest started kindergarten. My son-in-law walked past me, reached over without a word and clicked it off. Then he went to the refrigerator, opened it, stood there for a moment, and closed it again, as if I wasn't there. As if the kitchen had already become something that belonged only to him. I stood in the dark for a second, just a second, then I turned it back on. He didn't say anything, but he looked at me, and something in that look told me exactly what he thought of me and of my lamp and of my 31 years in this house. That was a Tuesday in February. By the following Monday, I had made a phone call that would change everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Gloria. Well, my friends call me that, though my full name is something my mother chose from a church hymnal, and I've never quite forgiven her for it. I'm 68 years old. I live again, properly, in the same house in Hamilton, Ontario, where I raised 2 daughters and buried a husband and grew tomatoes every summer in the side yard even when the summers weren't warm enough for it. The house is mine, has been mine since 1989, when my husband and I bought it for what now sounds like a joke of a number. We painted every room ourselves. We refinished the floors on our hands and knees over 2 weekends in October. We raised our girls here and watched them leave, one by one, and then my husband got sick and I watched him leave too, in a different way, on a Thursday morning in November with the snow just starting and the TV on low in the bedroom, because he liked the sound of it. After he passed, I had the house to myself for 4 years. Quiet years, not unhappy ones. I learned to cook for one, which takes longer than you'd think. I learned which silences were peaceful and which ones pressed on you. I kept the lamp on in the kitchen in the evenings because I liked the warmth of it, and because it had been ours, and because I could. Then my daughter called from Calgary. Her name is my business, not yours. I'll call her my daughter, because that's what matters. She called in April, her voice careful, and that way it gets when she's about to ask me something she already knows. I won't love. She and her husband were moving back to Ontario. His company had transferred him to the Mississauga office. They'd been looking at rentals, but the market was impossible. You know what rentals are like right now, Mom. You've seen the news, just until they got their footing. Just for a little while. Her husband, I'll call him what he was, my son-in-law. His name was Kyle, and he was 41 years old, broad-shouldered, good-looking in the way that certain men are good-looking and know it too well. He worked in logistics. He had opinions about everything and uncertainty about nothing. The first time I met him, at my daughter's convocation dinner in 2014, he'd corrected the waiter about the wine region on the menu. The waiter had been right. Kyle had not acknowledged this. I said yes. Of course I said yes. She was my daughter. They arrived in June with a moving truck and 2 cars and more boxes than I had rooms for. I gave them the master bedroom, my room, the one my husband and I had shared, because it had the ensuite and they needed space. I moved into the smaller room at the end of the hall. The one that used to be my youngest daughter's, the one with the window that sticks in the summer. I told myself it was temporary. The first few months were manageable. There were rhythms to work out, bathroom schedules, grocery habits, the question of who cooked and when, and whether my son-in-law's opinion about the correct way to load a dishwasher constituted a conversation or a lecture. Small things. The kinds of adjustments you make when you love someone and want things to work. He had a way of taking up space. Not physically, though he was a large man. It was more that he occupied a room differently than other people. He'd walk in, and somehow the room reorganized itself around him. The television would switch to whatever he wanted to watch. Conversations would shift to his stories, his colleagues, his thoughts on the Leafs or the housing market or the absolute failure of the current federal government. My daughter would laugh at the right moments. I would sit in my chair, the one by the front window, the one with the armrest, where the fabric had worn thin from years of my hand resting there. And I would drink my tea and say very little. I didn't say much because I had told myself it was temporary. 14 months in, I understood it was not. He'd stopped contributing to the groceries by October of the first year. Not all at once, it faded, the way things do when no one addresses them directly. First he'd forget his wallet, then he'd say he'd get the next one. Then the next one became a general concept, vague and retreating. My daughter sometimes handed me cash quietly, folded small, when he wasn't in the room, as if it were a secret between us, as if we were both boarders in someone else's house. I paid the property taxes. I paid the hydro and the gas and the Rogers bill and the water. I kept the hot water heater going when it started giving trouble in January, which cost me $1,100 I had not planned for. My pension is decent. I taught school for 28 years, and the OTPP has been good to me. But decent is not unlimited, and I was 67 years old, and I had not expected to be running a household for 3 people on it. I told my daughter gently in the spring that we should talk about contributions, a number, something fair. She agreed completely. She said she'd talk to Kyle. She must have talked to him, because 2 nights later he came into the kitchen while I was making tea, and he stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, and he said, very pleasantly, that he wanted me to know he was aware of the financial situation and that they were working on it and that he hoped I wasn't going to make this into something uncomfortable for everyone. I said I appreciated that. He said, good. Nothing changed. I started writing things down, not because I planned anything then. It was just something my husband used to do. He kept a small notebook in his desk, dates and amounts, repairs and receipts, the shape of things over time. I'd found it comforting after he died, so I started one of my own. Hydro bills, grocery receipts, the plumber, the new weather stripping on the back door, dates, amounts. I don't know exactly when things shifted with my son-in-law. I think it happened the way erosion happens. So gradually you don't notice the shape changing until one day the cliff edge is somewhere different than you thought it was. He started speaking to me the way you speak to someone slightly dim, slowly, with emphasis. When I had a question about the Wi-Fi password he'd changed without telling me, he sighed before answering. When I mentioned that I'd prefer if people took their shoes off at the door, my rule, my floors, the same rule I'd had for 30 years, he said that was really more of a preference than a requirement, and smiled at my daughter in a way that made her look down at her phone. The lamp was one thing. There were others. He rearranged the living room furniture one Saturday while I was at my book club. When I came home, my chair, the worn one, the one by the window, was pushed into the corner behind the door. The couch was angled toward the TV. There was a new side table I'd never seen, which he said they'd picked up at HomeSense because the room had needed something. I moved my chair back. He moved it again the following weekend. I moved it back. He stopped moving it. But I want you to understand what that exchange was. It wasn't about furniture. February came. That Tuesday in the kitchen, the lamp, and then, 3 days later, the thing that made me pick up the phone. I was in the living room on a Friday evening. My chair was where I'd put it. I was watching the local news, something I'd done every weeknight at 6 for more years than I could count, and my son-in-law came downstairs, walked to the TV, and changed the channel. He had the remote in his hand, and he sat down on the couch and pulled out his phone, and he said, without looking at me, "We're watching something later. You can watch in your room." Your room, my house, my television, which I'd had since 2019 and which I had paid for. My daughter was in the kitchen. I heard her stop moving. I don't know if she heard. I think she heard. I didn't say anything. I sat for a moment. Then I got up, got my coat, got my purse, and I took my keys from the hook by the door, my keys to my house, and I left. I drove to a Tim Hortons on Garth Street, and I sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes. I'm not too proud to admit that I cried a little. Not from sadness, exactly, more from the particular exhaustion of having held something together for a long time and feeling it come apart in your hands. My phone rang. My daughter. I let it ring. Then I drove to my friend Dorothy's, not in the file, a real friend. 26 years she made me tea and let me talk, and she didn't offer advice until I asked for it, which is the mark of a true friend. I stayed in her guest room that night. In the morning, Dorothy asked me what I wanted to happen. I thought about it seriously, not what I wanted emotionally. I wanted to rewind 4 years and have said no on the phone in April. I thought about what I wanted practically, what I could actually do. I want my house back, I said. Dorothy nodded. She'd been expecting that answer. Then you should call Renata, she said. Renata was her neighbor's daughter, a paralegal who'd recently started working in tenant and property law. Dorothy had mentioned her before when I'd talked about the situation. I'd never called because calling felt like escalating, and I had spent most of my adult life believing that if you just managed things carefully enough, they wouldn't need escalating. I called Renata that morning. Now, here is the thing I did not know. That I suspect many people in my situation don't know either. When someone lives in your home for an extended period, even without a formal lease, even as family, certain protections apply under Ontario's Residential Tenancies Act. They are not completely without rights simply because they are family. But they are also not without obligations, and the homeowner, me, also had rights I had not been exercising. Renata explained this to me carefully, in the way of someone who has explained it many times and has learned not to make people feel foolish for not knowing it. She asked me questions. How long had they been there? Was there anything in writing? Had money changed hands? I told her about my notebook. She was quiet for a moment. You've been keeping records, she said. My husband's habit, I said. I picked it up. Good, she said. That's very good. She walked me through the process. Because there was no formal lease and because they had been residing in my home, my primary residence, I had certain options available to me as the homeowner. Renata helped me prepare a formal written notice, dated, proper, legal, not a letter I wrote myself at the kitchen table. A document, the kind with language that means something. She asked me if I wanted to be present when it was delivered. She had a colleague, she said, who handled this kind of thing. I thought of my daughter's face. I thought of how she'd looked away on that Friday evening. I don't think I should be there, I said. Then you don't need to be, Renata said. I went back to Dorothy's. I brought my good cardigan and my library books because I wasn't sure how long things would take. Dorothy made us shepherd's pie. We watched Murdoch Mysteries and didn't talk about any of it for the rest of the evening, which was exactly what I needed. The following Wednesday at 10 in the morning, a man in a dark jacket rang my doorbell. I know this because my neighbor Fernt, lovely woman across the street, we'd kept each other's spare keys for 15 years, texted me. There's a man with a folder at your door, she wrote. Then, 2 minutes later, he's been let in. Then, after another few minutes, he's left. Everything okay? I told her yes. Everything was okay. I found out later, from my daughter, what had happened when the door opened. The man had asked to speak with both occupants. He'd presented the document. He'd explained the situation calmly and professionally. He'd answered questions. He'd left a copy. My son-in-law had, apparently, had a great deal to say. My daughter had not said much. The formal notice gave them 60 days as required. During that time, I stayed at Dorothy's, and once for a week at my younger daughter's place in Guelph. She'd been aware of the situation and furious about it in the focused way she's been furious about things since she was 9 years old. I didn't go back to the house. I didn't need to. Renata's colleague handled the communications when there were any. My son-in-law called me twice. I let it go to voicemail. His messages were long and involved words like unreasonable and family and what she's doing to us. I listened to both of them once and then I deleted them. My daughter called more. Those calls I answered after a few days. She cried. I let her. I didn't apologize and I didn't explain, because there was nothing to apologize for, and the explanation had been available to her for 2 years if she'd wanted to look for it. I told her I loved her. I told her she was always welcome in my home. I told her that her husband was not, and that this was not a negotiation. She said that wasn't fair. I said I understood. That was how it felt. We didn't speak for 3 weeks after that. Those were hard weeks. I won't pretend otherwise. Whatever anger I felt toward my son-in-law, my daughter was my daughter, and the silence between us had a specific weight to it, a quality I hadn't felt since she was 19, and we'd fought about something I can't even remember now. I cried about it once, properly, in Dorothy's bathroom with the fan on. Then I went back to her shepherd's pie and my library books. They were gone by the end of March. My neighbor Fern, bless her, texted me when she saw the car leave for the last time. I waited another day because I'm a cautious person, and then I drove home. I walked in through the front door with my key, which had always been my key, and I stood in the front hall for a moment. The house smelled slightly of someone else's cooking, and there was a scuff on the baseboard near the stairs that hadn't been there before, and the furniture was in the wrong positions. I put my bag down. I opened the windows, even though it was still cold. It was late March, still gray, one of those days that can't quite decide if it's winter or not. I let the air move through. Then I moved my chair back to the window, the worn armrest, the spot where my hand goes. I made tea. I turned on my lamp. I sat down. My daughter called me in April. Not to argue, just to talk. Her voice was different, quieter, more careful, the way it gets when she's working something out inside herself. She said she'd been thinking. She said she knew she should have done more. She didn't say it perfectly, and I didn't need her to. I told her to come for Easter. She came alone. We made the Ukrainian Easter bread her grandmother used to make, my mother's recipe, slightly guesswork, always different every year. And we ate it at the kitchen table with my lamp on, and we talked until the light outside went dark. She's in an apartment now, in Oakville. She sounds better on the phone, lighter. As for my son-in-law, I don't know. I don't ask. That's her business. And whatever happens, I hope she chooses herself. That's all I'll say about that. My house is quiet in the evenings now. Properly quiet. The kind that doesn't press on you. The kind that has a shape to it that you chose. I watch the news at 6. I grow tomatoes in the side yard, though it was a bad summer for them last year, and I suspect this summer won't be much better. I have Dorothy over on Thursdays. I go to my book club. I sleep in my own bed, in my own room, with the window open a crack, the way I like it. I am 68 years old, and I have lived in this house for more than 3 decades, and I own it outright, and no one will ever again turn off my lamp while I am still standing at the counter. I want to say something to anyone who recognizes themselves in this story. Anyone who has found themselves slowly, quietly, handed smaller and smaller spaces inside their own life, who has moved their chair back and had it moved again and moved it back again, and never said the thing they were thinking because they believed that keeping the peace was their job, their particular duty, the cost of loving difficult people. You are allowed to pick up the phone. You don't have to shout. You don't have to make a scene. You don't have to be certain when you dial that you're doing the right thing. You just have to be willing to find out. The law is not a dramatic thing. It is not revenge. Not really. It is just language, specific, careful language that says this is mine, and I am telling you clearly, and there are people who will help me say it if I ask. I asked. I have my house back. I have my lamp. I have my chair by the window, and my tea, and my quiet evenings, and my daughter on the phone on Sundays, sounding lighter than she has in years. I am home. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. I've thought a lot about what I would have done differently. Not in a punishing way, I'm past that, but in the honest way you think about things, when you have quiet evenings again, and your chair is back where it belongs. I think I would have spoken sooner, not louder, just sooner. There's something that happens when you love someone and you keep making small allowances for them. You tell yourself you're being generous, and maybe you are, at first. But generosity without any limit to it isn't kindness. It's just the slow disappearance of yourself. Every time I didn't say something, every time I moved my chair back without comment, every time I folded my feelings up small so they wouldn't take up too much space in my own house, I was teaching Kyle something. I was teaching him that I could be moved, that I would absorb whatever came, that my comfort was negotiable and his was not. We do teach people how to treat us. I used to think that was a harsh thing to say, the kind of thing that blames the person who got hurt, but I understand it differently now. It's not about blame. It's about the fact that human beings left without boundaries will naturally expand into the space available to them. Kyle wasn't a monster from the start. He was just a man who encountered no real limit, and so he kept going, the way water moves through whatever gap it finds. The limit was mine to set. I didn't set it, and so he kept going, until the kitchen lamp and then the television and then your room, his words, in my house. What I did finally was not dramatic. I didn't shout. I didn't make threats. I sat in a Tim Hortons parking lot, and I cried a little, and then I called Dorothy, and then I called Renata, and then I let people who knew what they were doing handle the part that required legal language. That's intelligence, I think. Knowing what you can do yourself, and knowing when to ask someone who knows more than you do. I'd spent 2 years thinking I had to manage this alone, quietly, inside the family. That was the error. Not weakness. Error. And my daughter, that's the part that took longer to make peace with. She was in that house too. She saw what happened, she looked away. I won't pretend that didn't cost me something. It did. But I've watched her in the months since, and I think she was doing her own quiet calculus, her own slow reckoning. And the fact that I held the line gave her something to eventually stand on too. She's lighter now. That's not nothing. Courage isn't the absence of fear or sadness. It's what happens when you decide that what you're afraid of is less important than what you're about to lose. I was afraid of conflict. I was afraid of damaging my relationship with my daughter. I was afraid, if I'm honest, of being the kind of woman who makes trouble. But I was already losing my house, my space, my lamp, my chair, my ordinary quiet evenings. The things that seemed small were not small. They were the whole thing. You are allowed to hold on to the whole thing.